I'm 32 years old, and I work as a forensic accountant for a federal contractor in Washington, D.C. My job is to find things people try to hide. Fraudulent invoices buried inside spreadsheets, money trails disguised as consulting fees, numbers that look clean until you know exactly where to look. I've spent 9 years training my eyes to catch what other people miss. I never expected I'd have to use those same skills on someone who shared a childhood bedroom with me. 6 weeks before my best friend's wedding, I received a certified letter from an estate attorney I had never heard of. The letter informed me that a deed amendment had been filed on my late grandmother's property in Charlottesville, a Victorian house she had left entirely to me 18 months earlier. According to the document, I had signed a co-ownership transfer form 8 weeks prior, adding my sister's name to the title. I had never signed anything. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after reading that letter. My coffee went cold. My phone buzzed twice and I ignored it. I read the letter 4 times, slowly, the way I read financial disclosures at work, looking for the sentence that contradicts itself, the number that doesn't belong. Then I set it face down on the table, opened my laptop, and pulled up the county property records portal for Albemarle County, Virginia. The amendment was real, filed and stamped. My name was on it, and the signature was almost mine, but not quite. I've signed my name approximately 40,000 times in my life. I know the way my capital L leans slightly right, the way I close the loop on my lowercase e. Whoever forged it had practiced. They were close, but the pressure was wrong on the final stroke, and the date format used a slash instead of the hyphen I have used since college. To anyone else, it would have looked fine. To me, it looked like a scream. My sister and I are 18 months apart. Growing up, people sometimes mistook us for twins. Same dark hair, same narrow shoulders, same habit of tucking one foot underneath us when we sat on the couch. Our mother used to say we came out of the same mold. I believed her for a long time. My sister had a gift for making me believe things. What I didn't know yet, what I would only learn later, when I started pulling threads, was that my sister had borrowed heavily against her lifestyle for the better part of 3 years, a personal loan she never mentioned, 2 Max credit cards, a private debt to someone whose name appeared nowhere official, and the Charlottesville house, which had been appraised at just over $1.2 million, was the cleanest asset in my name. Clean, quiet, and apparently worth forging a signature to get. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I work with investigators. I understand the difference between knowing something and being able to prove it, so I did what I do at work. I started documenting. The wedding I mentioned, my best friend Rachel's wedding, was happening in 5 weeks at an estate venue outside Fredericksburg. My sister was a bridesmaid. I was the maid of honor. We had been planning this together since Rachel got engaged 14 months earlier. Every weekend for 2 months, the 3 of us had sat in Rachel's living room with swatches and seating charts and a shared spreadsheet that we had named, in a moment of optimism, the Dream Day Doc. I showed up to every planning meeting. I smiled. I helped fold 200 linen napkins into some kind of complicated origami swan that Rachel had seen on Pinterest. I stood in a bridal boutique in Georgetown while my sister zipped me into the bridesmaid dress and said I looked beautiful. And I said thank you, and I looked at her in the mirror and thought, I know what you did. 3 weeks before the wedding, I quietly hired a handwriting analyst through a firm I'd used professionally before. I overnighted her 2 samples of my sister's handwriting, a birthday card from 2 years ago, and a note she had left in my refrigerator during a visit last fall, along with a copy of the forged deed amendment. I asked for a preliminary assessment only. No report, not yet, just a yes or no. She came back to me in 4 days. The answer was yes. I also requested the original filing documents from the county recorder's office. Under Virginia law, I was entitled to them as a property owner of record. What came back told me something useful. The filing had been submitted in person, at the Charlottesville office, on a Tuesday afternoon in March. My sister lived 40 minutes from Charlottesville. I had been in Phoenix that Tuesday for a client audit. I had the boarding pass, the hotel receipt, and 6 hours of meeting notes to prove it. I kept all of it in a folder I stored in my office at work, not at home. I labeled it with a client code that meant nothing to anyone but me. The weekend before the wedding, the bridesmaids gathered at Rachel's mother's house in Fredericksburg for a final fitting and a low-key bachelorette dinner. There were 6 of us total. We drank Prosecco and ate charcuterie and took photos in our robes, and my sister sat across from me at the long dining table and refilled my glass and laughed at something I said, and her laugh sounded exactly the way it always had. I watched her. I had been watching her for weeks. She was relaxed. Easy. Whatever she had done, it had not cost her sleep. That told me something too. The wedding day was a Saturday in late May. The venue was beautiful, an old tobacco plantation converted into an event space, rolling lawns, white tent, the kind of golden hour light that photographers charge extra to shoot in. Rachel was stunning. Her husband cried when he saw her walk down the aisle, which made most of the room cry, which made me cry, and for a few minutes I forgot about everything else and just felt the warmth of being in a room full of people who genuinely loved someone. Then the reception started, and I went to work. I had asked a favor from a contact of mine, a woman named Petra who does contract investigative work and who had helped me on a fraud case the previous year. I had described my situation to her in general terms, and she had offered, without being asked, to be present at the event in a professional capacity. She attended as a guest of the photographer, which was easy to arrange because the photographer owed her a favor from something unrelated. Petra does not look like what she does for a living. She looks like someone's stylish aunt from Connecticut. Nobody gives her a second glance. The reception was halfway through dinner when the venue's event coordinator, a composed woman in her 40s named Diane, came to find me near the bar. She leaned in and said, quietly, that she needed to speak with me privately for a moment. We stepped just outside the tent, near the path to the garden. Diane told me that one of her staff members, a young woman doing coat check near the entrance, had overheard a phone conversation approximately 40 minutes earlier. My sister had stepped away from the table and taken a call near the coat room hallway. The staff member had not intended to listen, but the hallway carried sound, and what she heard had unsettled her enough that she reported it to Diane. My sister had been on the phone with someone, and she had used my name, and she had said something about the house, and the word done came up more than once, in a way that suggested completion rather than plan. I thanked Diane. I kept my face completely neutral. I asked if the staff member would be willing to write down what she remembered, in her own words, and Diane said she would ask. I walked back inside. I found Petra near the dessert table. I said 3 words to her. She made contact, and Petra nodded once, the way people do when they have been waiting for the thing they expected to arrive. The rest of the evening I spent doing what a maid of honor does. I gave my speech. I danced with Rachel during the first open dance. I made sure the elderly relatives had seats and that the cake was cut at the right moment. I hugged people. I smiled until my face ached, and I watched my sister across the tent, laughing with the groomsmen, clinking her glass, completely unaware that the folder in my office had just gotten 1 item thicker. 2 days after the wedding, I called the estate attorney whose name had appeared on the filing, not to accuse, but to ask a procedural question about property record amendments, framed as something I was researching for work. Attorneys talk more than people expect when they think the conversation is hypothetical. I learned that the amendment had been processed through a notary whose office was in Charlottesville, and that the notary's stamp number was on the public record. I cross-referenced it. The notary had retired 8 months ago and had filed a complaint with the state bar the previous fall about unauthorized use of her stamp. The complaint was still open. I added that to the folder. I did not call my sister. I did not email her. I responded to her text the way I always did, briefly, warmly, a few words, an emoji at the end. She texted me after the wedding to say she'd had fun and that Rachel looked like a movie star, and I said I agreed, and we sent a few more lines back and forth, and I felt nothing. Or rather, I felt something very contained, like a fire in a box with all the vents closed. 3 weeks later, I had everything I needed. The handwriting analysis, the filing records, the timeline, the notary complaint, the deed itself, a written statement from the courtroom attendant, and a second document that Petra had obtained through entirely legal means, a paper trail connecting my sister's debt to a creditor who had been pressuring her for repayment since February. The Charlottesville house would have solved that problem almost completely. I hired a property and estate attorney. She was referred to me by a colleague, and she had the particular manner of someone who has seen every variation of family financial fraud and stopped being surprised by any of it somewhere around year 12 of her practice. I walked her through everything in a 2-hour meeting. At the end, she looked at my folder, looked at me, and said, "This is thorough." She filed an emergency motion to void the amendment on the grounds of forgery, fraud, and use of a fraudulently stamped notarization. She also sent a formal legal notice to my sister's address. My sister called me 4 hours after the notice arrived. I let it go to voicemail. She called again. I let that go too. On the third call, I answered. She started talking immediately, quickly, a flood of words, that there had been a misunderstanding, that she had been trying to protect the asset, that she had intended to tell me, that things had gotten complicated. Her voice had that quality it sometimes got when she was frightened, a little higher than usual, slightly breathless, like she was trying to outrun something. I waited until she stopped. Then I said, "I know about the notary stamp complaint. I know about the debt. I know you were in Charlottesville on March 14th. I have a handwriting analysis. I have a written statement from the courtroom at the wedding. I have everything." There was a silence so complete I could hear her breathing. "I'm not calling the police today," I said. "But I want you to understand that that decision is not permanent. What happens next depends entirely on what you do in the next 10 days. She started to cry. It was not a small cry. It was the kind that sounds like it's coming from somewhere real, and maybe it was. But I had learned something in 9 years of forensic accounting. Tears and remorse are not the same thing. Remorse changes behavior. Tears are just water. "I'm going to hang up now," I said. "My attorney will be in touch." The void order was granted 3 weeks later. The deed amendment was struck from the record. My sister retained her own attorney, who apparently advised her that she had no defensible position because there was no counterfiling and no court date. The fraudulent notary issue was referred separately to the state bar and to a county prosecutor's office. I was not the one who initiated that referral, but I did not obstruct it either. My sister and I have not spoken since that phone call. She sent me 2 emails in the weeks following. I read them once each, filed them, and did not respond. I am not angry in the way people expect me to be angry. I don't spend evenings replaying conversations or imagining what I should have said. The thing I feel most when I allow myself to feel it is a kind of grief for the version of my sister I thought I knew, for the bedroom we shared, for all the years that turned out to contain something I hadn't been measuring. Rachel doesn't know the details. A few of my closest friends do. My mother does not. And I have made a decision about that which I revisit sometimes and always arrive at the same place. She is 63, and she loves us both, and some truths reconfigure a person's past in ways that can't be undone. I'm not ready to do that to her. Maybe I won't ever be. That's a decision I'm allowed to make. The house in Charlottesville is still mine. I drove down there last month on a Sunday alone and sat on the back porch where my grandmother used to shell peas in the summer. The yard needed work. The hedges had gone uneven, and there was a section of fence that had come loose from its post. I made a list of what needed to be fixed. I sat there for a long time in the quiet. It's mine. Some people, when they hear a story like this, want to know if I feel guilty for not doing more, not pressing charges, not making it public, not ensuring consequences beyond what I've described. I understand the question. I've asked it myself. What I keep coming back to is this. I am a person who works with evidence for a living. Evidence tells you what happened. It doesn't always tell you what justice looks like. Sometimes justice is a voided document. Sometimes it's a house sitting on 2 acres in Charlottesville with your name and only your name on the deed. Sometimes it's sitting on a back porch in the late afternoon and knowing that the thing you work to protect is still there, and the person who tried to take it has to live with what they did, quietly in their own life, for as long as that takes. I locked up the house at dusk and drove back to DC with the windows down. My phone buzzed somewhere on the highway. A notification from a work account, nothing urgent. I turned the radio up and kept driving. The numbers always tell the truth eventually. You just have to know what you're looking for. There's a version of this story where I fall apart, where I confront my sister at the wedding reception in front of everyone, where I make a scene, where I let the anger do what anger wants to do. I thought about that version a lot in the weeks between finding that letter and the moment everything resolved. It would have been easier in some ways, faster, louder, more satisfying in the way a broken window is satisfying for exactly 1 second before you realize you still have to clean up the glass. I chose a different version, not because I'm a naturally patient person, and not because what she did didn't hurt. It hurt in the specific, quiet way that only certain betrayals can, the kind that reach back into your past and make you question what was real. But I had spent 9 years learning that emotion and evidence are two separate tools, and that mixing them usually destroys both. What I've come to understand is that actions accumulate. Every choice a person makes adds to a kind of ledger that they carry whether they acknowledge it or not. My sister had been building debt, not just the financial kind, for years before she ever walked into that notary's office. Small decisions, then larger ones, each one made easier by the last. That's how people end up doing things they once would have thought impossible, not in a single leap, but in a long series of small steps away from who they meant to be. And on the other side of that, the same is true in reverse. The 9 years I spent developing precision, patience, and the discipline to look at a situation clearly before reacting. Those weren't wasted. They were exactly what I needed when it mattered most. The skills I built for a career protected something irreplaceable in my personal life. I don't think that's coincidence. I think that's what it looks like when you invest in yourself over a long enough period of time. Intelligence, in my experience, is not primarily about knowing things. It's about knowing what to do with what you know and when. It's the difference between having evidence and knowing how to use it, between feeling anger and deciding what that anger is actually for. I had every reason to react the moment I read that letter. Instead, I asked myself what outcome I actually wanted, and I worked backward from there. That discipline, choosing response over reaction, is something I had to practice. It didn't come naturally, but it was the thing that saved the house. What I want anyone listening to take from this is simple. Build something in yourself that can't be forged. Your sister, your colleague, a stranger, anyone can attempt to take what belongs to you. But the clarity to see it clearly, the patience to document rather than detonate, the courage to pursue what's right through the slow and unglamorous channels, those things live inside you, and no one can file an amendment to remove them. The house in Charlottesville is still mine. The deed has my name on it, with the correct signature, in my handwriting, on a day I was fully present. That's how it was always supposed to be. And I drive down there sometimes and sit on that back porch, and I think about the work it took to keep it. Not the legal work, though that mattered, but the internal work. The decision, made over and over again in those weeks, to stay clear when everything in me wanted to get loud, that decision was mine too, and no one can take it.